Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to break down the key tactical themes in Manchester City's Champions League exit to Lyon. When we break down the game, when we do look at the board, we have both sides looking to play in a back three, and it was Pep Guardiola who dominated headlines for shifting his tactical approach. On paper, many expected City to play in a 3-1-4-2, but when we assess the positioning of that City attack, it did look like they were playing more of a 3-4-3. So with many people questioning why Guardiola would shift to a three-man backline, one is the fact that Lyon are playing with two strikers, so he wanted to ensure that he does have 3v2 at the back, given City's defensive issues this season. And then if we look to the personnel, he ended up taking a gamble, and rather than pushing too many attacking players forward, he had Rodri and Gundogan in that midfield zone to ensure that he could stop Lyon from breaking in transition, and then that's why Kevin De Bruyne was playing a bit higher. It was a given that Lyon would look to sit a bit deeper and look to break with speed and transition, with Memphis Depay up front looking to drag players in towards him, and then Akanji looking to break into the channels, with Memphis also able to do that as well. However, while Guardiola looked to be cautious and to ensure that Lyon couldn't cause that threat going forward, it was in attack where they looked a bit short of options. You had Sterling and Gabriel Jesus up front, but De Bruyne was looking to help them by pushing higher, but it was Lyon's overall shape that helped them ensure that City struggled to create chances. In the earlier stages, it did look like Lyon would encounter issues with City building out of the back, because Fernandinho was the spare man pushing forward from right center back, and although he didn't have the ability to play the ball into the midfield zone because De Bruyne and Gundogan were marked out of the game, he was able to shift the ball out into the wider areas, and it did leave him with the ability to potentially play balls over the top. The manner in which Rudy Garcia did look to counter that was to have OR step out into the path of Fernandinho to ensure that he could stop distributing possession out into the City attacking players. That does mean that Guimaraes would have to step out and provide cover, but that was a consistent theme to ensure that City struggled to build play from deeper positions. What also happened was that with De Bruyne occupying an advanced position, there were times where he would be in behind that gap between OR and Marçal, but with OR stepping out into the path of Fernandinho, that now leaves De Bruyne free. There were times where De Bruyne did drop off into that deep right channel to try and get on the ball, but what you ended up seeing was that OR would step out into his path. So although he did have the passing options of Gabriel Jesus and Raheem Sterling breaking him behind, he was closed down in that manner. But with OR now stepping out into the path of Fernandinho, that allowed Marçal to push forward as the spare center back. So what you can see across this pitch is that you have the wingbacks closing the wingbacks. You have now Manchester City struggling to build out of the back because Fernandinho is closed down and Kevin De Bruyne simply can't get on the ball. So now you have to question how Manchester City were able to create chances. That stems specifically down the left-hand side through Raheem Sterling's movement and the fact that Joao Cancelo consistently got across Dubois, and there were times where he even ran beyond him to deliver crosses into the box. When you look at how City's attack was shaped, with De Bruyne now marked out by Marçal, that meant that Marcelo was stepping into the path of Gabriel Jesus, and it left Raheem Sterling ahead of Denier. But what he did very well was that he often adopted positions a few yards away from Denier, and that allowed Raheem Sterling to make runs beyond him into that left half space, and on a consistent basis, Cancelo was able to pick out his Manchester City teammate. Ultimately, majority of those moves down that left-hand side followed a similar theme. What we ended up seeing was that there was one example in particular that followed that movement of Gundogan pulling out Kakurai and Dubois being cut across by Cancelo, and we ended up seeing Sterling make that run off Guimaraes, but what ended up happening is that when Sterling receives that ball in left half space, there are 6 Lyon players in the box and only Gabriel Jesus looking to attack the ball. And if it wasn't Sterling's passing options being outnumbered in the box, it was simply Sterling. The other example that we do look at is Cancelo cutting across Dubois, and we end up seeing Kakare occupying Gundogan, but it's Sterling again from a deeper position running off Denier to receive the ball in that left channel, but he ends up being closed down by Denier, Guimaraes, and Dubois. Still, even with the limitations that Guardiola's system put on this City attack, it was Sterling getting into good areas down the left-hand side, and he replicated that down on the right-hand side, where he made a run in between Marcel and Cornet to receive a pass from Gabriel Jesus, and his pullback to Rodri ended up forcing Lopez into a save. So with De Bruyne unable to get involved in the game on the right-hand side, it would make sense to shift him over to the left, and towards the end of the first half, he was able to get into good positions. Initially, Caqueret did a very good job of tracking De Bruyne's movement, but when we look to two examples, we end up seeing how De Bruyne was able to influence the game briefly. First, it was Cancelo playing a ball across Dubois into the path of De Bruyne running off Guimaraes, but his first-time fizzed effort was cleared by Marcelo, and minutes later, it's Garcia stepping forward into Lyon's half, playing the ball across Caqueret into De Bruyne, dropping off Marcelo and Denier. Before Caqueret can close down De Bruyne, he ends up playing a quality cross around the Lyon center backs for Sterling darting in between Cornet and Marcel, but it's a slight touch from the Lyon defender that ends up forcing Sterling to opt for a pullback that's eventually cleared. On the other hand, when we look to how Lyon were able to get into good attacking positions, like I stated earlier, City's overall approach was to ensure that they couldn't play through midfield to break in transition, so they opted to go long, and whenever they did look to play balls over the top, City's backline looked nervy. We could look to the time where Memphis Depay drops off deeper and he drags out Fernandinho, and then you see Akambi running across Garcia to break into that left channel, but in that scenario, Garcia did a very good job of providing cover. That was a warning sign for Guardiola's defense, and minutes later, Lyon were able to take the lead from a similar attack. What you ended up seeing was that Marcel was able to push forward, and we ended up seeing Rodri shift across to provide cover while looking to block off the passing lane into OR. But what we see ahead of Marcel is frightening for Manchester City fans. You have Cornet occupying Walker, and then you have Fernandinho not picking up Memphis, and what you end up seeing in that City backline is that Memphis is behind Fernandinho, creating a 2v1 ahead of Garcia with Akambi. So when you end up seeing that ball played over the top, it's Akambi darting into that gap between Laporte and Garcia, and he drags out Laporte to get on the ball. What Laporte does very well here is that he tracks the movement of Akambi and he makes a quality challenge to ensure that Akambi can't push forward. However, the problem that City encountered here is that while that long ball was played forward, you ended up seeing Cornet continue to track the movement of Akambi for cover, and Kyle Walker doesn't follow him. So when that challenge is made, Cornet is able to break free onto that loose ball, and with Ederson out of position, he wraps an effort into the corner. So it was clear that Guardiola had to make a tactical change so that City could offer more attacking impetus, because defensively, while they did do a good job of ensuring that Lyon couldn't break in transition, that simple long ball over the top was down to a defensive mistake. What we ended up seeing Guardiola do is that he brought on Riyad Mahrez for Fernandinho, and City shifted to more of a 4-2-3-1. When you look at that 4-2-3-1, now you have De Bruyne in that number 10 role. Mahrez and Sterling could help occupy the center backs, and then with the fullbacks pushing forward now, that pegs back the wing backs, and you end up having more space in that midfield zone for Kevin De Bruyne to get on the ball. Rudy Garcia ended up shifting to a 5-4-1 to try and combat that, but as that second half continued, it was De Bruyne getting into good quality positions between the lines to get on the ball and push City forward. Ultimately, the build-up to De Bruyne's equalizer stemmed from the successful template that works for City in the first half. It was Cancelo playing a pass across Akambi for Mahrez dropping off a Denier, and he was able to turn away from Denier and play a chip ball over Denier and Dubois for Sterling breaking into that left half space. Sterling's able to get onto that pass in that left half space, cut across Denier, then he pulls the ball back across Marcelo for De Bruyne, making that free run into the box unmarked, and he finishes superbly. However, despite the fact that City were able to claw back into the game following their tactical shift, it was once again the defensive mistakes that led to their downfall here. They were warned shortly after De Bruyne had equalized the game when Lyon looked to play long balls over Cancelo and Kyle Walker to play in Cornet. The first one was misjudged by Walker, and Cornet was able to break free into left half space. And then when we look to OR playing the ball over Cancelo for Cornet, it does play in Cornet free, but he's unable to control the ball and it falls into the path of Ederson. And while those two opportunities may have hinted why Guardiola opted for a three-man backline, it was Lyon's winner that ultimately justified Guardiola's decision from a defensive aspect. What we ended up seeing was that Laporte steps forward into Lyon's half to try and play a pass forward, and you have both fullbacks higher up the pitch. Laporte plays a loose pass, and following Caqueret's interception, Lyon looked to break in transition, and it's Dembele pushing forward beyond Laporte to break free on goal to put Lyon ahead. And then even when you look to the third goal, a simple Ederson mistake, he pushes the ball into the path of Dembele, and Dembele killed off the game. So when you break down that game as a whole, Guardiola has received criticism for shifting to a three-man defense, but you can understand why he was looking to do that to ensure that Lyon couldn't have a threat in transition. Unfortunately for Guardiola, his defense consistently made mistakes when Lyon looked to play balls over the top, and that ultimately led to their downfall. Even though that three-man backline did limit their ability to create chances, City were able to get into good positions and simply lack quality. But when they shifted to a 4-2-3-1, although they did look a bit more comfortable going forward and frankly should have killed off the game, what you ended up seeing from them was that they were susceptible to quick counterattacks, and once they made those defensive mistakes, Lyon were able to pounce, and that was the difference maker here as City's defense ultimately knocked them out of Europe. Hi everybody, thanks for watching, and subscribe here for your latest tactical analysis and daily commentary on the Interview show. And if that wasn't enough, don't forget you could find more organic, unfiltered soccer/football analysis on the Interviews podcast, the best soccer/football podcast in the world, available on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and any Android apps on your Android devices.